welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So the Copenhagen monstrosity, we're now 2 days, 2.5 days before the end of this. China and India continue to obviously resist the imposition of binding carbon limits to strangle their economy and destroy their economic development, condemning their populations to eternal poverty and indeed to genocide, because stagnation, it doesn't really exist. It's you're either moving forward or you're collapsing backward, and the stasis, right, the middle road is almost non-existent. They also, China, India, resisting intrusive verification of carbon. In other words, international green fascist climate cops from the globaloni regime trying to come in and tell you, what you can burn in the way of coal or wood or whatever it is. On Monday, the African countries walked out. They actually demand money, and it's understandable that they do, but unfortunately this takes the form of buying into the climate demagogy. They seem to be demanding that the Kyoto limitations be retained. These limit the carbon emissions of the more rich countries, in their view. A lot of demagogy going on here. And the African walkout then supported by the Group of 77 non-aligned, which is really about 130, and China support the walkout. On Wednesday, we had the NGOs walking out because they say that the deal that is under discussion is not fascist enough, not genocidal enough. It's got to be more draconian. It's got to strangle third world development more. So this was, of course, Naomi Klein being one of the charming foundation-funded operatives in this NGO swamp. And remember, NGO is another word for intelligence agencies in drag. It's snowing in Copenhagen in the middle of these demonstrations. A lot of black bloc anarchist types, anti-globaloni protesters, but counter gangs, police agents running wild. Snowing in Denmark and Moscow, it's minus 22 centigrade, meaning well below 0 Fahrenheit. The river, the Neva, I guess it is frozen. So the debate goes on, Al Gore and others being questioned, and notice that the goons in Copenhagen, the United Nations goons, are active. This reminds me of my own experience 35 years ago, November 1974, at the United Nations World Food Conference in Rome, where I was personally ejected, driven out of the conference because the UN goons didn't like my coverage. I said that much of what was being put forward as serious analysis was awful. OFFAL, that is horse manure. They didn't like that. They didn't like my somewhat aggressive interview with René Dumont, one of the French climate ghouls, an agronomist at that time who had some interest. Anyway, here's the question. If you're concerned about glaciers, ice caps, polar bears, that's one thing. But if you're concerned about the 40,000 human beings who perish, and this is minimal 40,000, that's an old figure, that's pre-depression. Could be 50,000, could be 100,000, we don't know. 40,000 a day die of starvation, malnutrition, and other causes that could be treated for just a few pennies. That's the human condition. The human problem is not the glaciers, the ice caps, and the polar bears. We had all of that taken much further during the medieval warm period, back there in 1100 when Leif Erikson and Eric the Red made it from Iceland over to Canada. We're well within the historically observed oscillation bounds. It's genocide in the third world. This is pointed out usefully on Russia Today in the past 24 hours by a guy by the name of Piers Corbyn, a British maverick. Something good here. Piers Corbyn of Weather Action says this is a gravy train for scientists. It's a thieves' kitchen. It's designed to hold back the development of the third world. And he says that factories in the north of England are being shut down under the aegis of these carbon offsets. And in particular, an interesting charge from Piers Corbyn. He says that the boss of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a character called Dr. Pachauri, of India. Dr. Pacharai of India, boss of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and of course this is the thing that bases itself directly on the Climate Research Unit at East Anglia University, that hotbed of charlatans and quackademics and falsifiers and neo-McCarthyites. This guy Pacharai is a railroad engineer who works for the Tata family, that the Tata interest, T-A-T-A. This is the biggest conglomerate in India, and they are rapacious, they are oligarchical in the extreme. The Tata works have just closed down a steel mill in the north of England at a place I think called Redcar. That has been shut down because they find that they can make more money on climate carbon offsets, this hokum, than they can through the production of steel. So yes, indeed, it is a fraud. The goal of the fraud is not so much money, although money is certainly important for the individual participants. The overall goal of this is world genocide and the destruction of science, technology, progress, and industry. And that has been, as I pointed out many times, the oligarchical program that we can observe going back 3,000, 4,000 years at the very least. Oligarchs hate science, they hate invention, because those are threats to the social order, meaning they are threats to entrenched oligarchical privilege and social order, which is based on the domination of some groups in the society over others, and there's no rational reason for this to be this way. Now, the presence of Rasmussen as the head of NATO and the antics of the Danish government calls upon us to go back to the Nazi occupation of Denmark, when it's certainly the case that Denmark was the ideal protectorate for Hitler. This is what the Nazis themselves said. The king of Denmark, unlike the king of Norway, who fled to England and led a resistance, the king of Denmark stayed in the country and essentially collaborated. It became the model protectorate. For many years, there was no resistance to the Nazis whatsoever in Denmark. So I think we're seeing that unfortunate strain coming to the fore again in the role of Denmark in NATO and in this climate conference, because you can see these cops and goons gassing people and all the rest of it. So that is the question of Copenhagen. We will know by Friday if this thing has failed completely, and that would be the ideal outcome for the human species. This has to be blocked. It has to be sabotaged. The best thing is for this to break up with no agreement whatsoever. As the Danish environmental minister pointed out, support for this demagogy and lunacy will never be as big as it is right now. So if we can get into 2010, let me point out, we've got Obama, his poll numbers now, Real Clear Politics average Obama plus 3.4%, but the Rasmussen poll of likely voters, which is the one that counts for elections, Obama minus 7%. And on the generic ballot, the Republicans are ahead 2.7%. This would indicate that Obama's ability to ram through his fascist corporate state program is going to be of limited duration. And by the time you get into 2010, we can hope that conditions will gradually improve and that it will be possible to block this cap and tax, cap and trade carbon monstrosity that is now in the works, that they're attempting to impose. And if it's true that the Russians were responsible for leaking this material from the Climate Research Unit at East Anglia University, I can only join Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles in 1863-64 saying, thank God for the Russians. Thank God for the Russians if they performed this vital public service of exposing the quackademics and charlatans of the climatology mafia. Back in a minute.